The very first thing I tell farmers when they ask me how they can increase profitability is this. Well, I ask them a question usually, and that question is, do you understand what profit is and how it comes about in your operation? And usually that leads to, well, what do you mean by that? And I usually ask, well, do you know your numbers? And knowing your numbers is extremely important. And everything that we do here at Legacy Farmers predicated on the fact that you have to know the fundamentals of your business. There's 3 financial documents in every operation. There's your balance sheet, your income statement, and your cash flows. And what we really focus on is your balance sheet and your cash flows. And so those 2 things can really determine how successful you are in the long run. You got to know your numbers. Managing risk around the profit figure in your operation is more important now than it ever has been. So margins have been declining for years now. The primary reason that margins have been declining is because people are not managing the risk in the industry. We've continued to operate businesses like the people that own the businesses before us have, our parents and our grandparents, but the risk profile of the agricultural industry was quite different. The volatility in yields, the volatility in prices just weren't there. Today, because of the global influence that we have on our markets, it's much harder to maintain profit and continue building equity. Volatility is higher than it ever has been. When we look at different stats, when we start tracking trends in the markets, and the volatility factor is one thing to really take into consideration. If you look at the futures markets and the amount of ups and downs, the super highs and the super deep valleys that we've had to navigate is something that has caused producers to both reach some of their biggest gains they ever have in their operation, but it's also forced a lot of family businesses out of the industry. Before we can even start beginning to talk about risk management or any other element of your business, we really have to understand where you are and where you've been. Where you've been is your balance sheet, where you are is your cash flow. You have to understand these numbers in order to organize yourself, create a plan for the future, and measure your progress towards that plan throughout the year. When we bring people into Legacy Farmer, we like to talk about break evens first because you don't know your profit unless you know where the break even point is first. So we have different elements in our system that help digest that can evaluate any particular commodity's situation and what it's going to take in order to get us above water. And you can think of break even as like the surface of the water and everything above it is profit, right? We're trying to get from below the water where we're drowning to up in the air where we're thriving. And so we have to understand where that surface plane is before we even begin to start discussing profit. We have lots of cases to where a producer comes in, doesn't have very good clarity in their operation, struggles to understand where they're going and where they've been. We spend time really digesting those elements of their business and backtracking on what we like to call the fundamentals. The 3 documents that producers should be looking at to understand their profitability and the success of their business are the balance sheet, the income statement, and the cash flow. Okay. Most operations have QuickBooks, which is going to tell you your P&L, your income statement. That is not usually a good indicator of what is going to happen from year to year. And it's not gonna tell you kind of what your operation has produced in the past. So here at Legacy Farmer, we focus on balance sheet and cash flow. That cash flow is gonna be really detrimental to your success in the long run because there's operations out there that show profit, but they have no cash in the bank and their line of credit is fully maxed out. There's the opposite situation where we're showing no profit and we're showing plenty of cash, plenty to operate. Sometimes producers come into our community and say, well, I don't really understand why my QuickBooks doesn't match up for reality or what I'm dealing with currently on the farm. That does not surprise us. And the reality is that is one document of 3 that's super important in terms of helping you gauge what you need to finish out crop operations for the rest of the year and how to create free cash flow that ultimately results in equity gain in the long term. When I speak about risk management, I'm talking about a number of things that are important to consider if you plan on staying in agriculture. Risk management doesn't only refer to the risk management in the price, it also refers to the risk management in the crop as well, the yield potential or the calf and your calving percentages, the things that you can count on in your operation. We need to stabilize those things in order to create something of what would resemble a normal expectation for the farm. Right now, normalcy is extremely hard to determine because what is normal anymore? And so the only way we have to move forward from here is to understand what we're selling these things for and what these things are actually able to produce. A huge problem in our industry is that producers are always trying to swing for the fence. And why are they swinging for the fence? It's because everybody hates the idea of I have to pay for a loss over 4 or 5 years. This next year is gonna be so great, even if they don't believe that or not, they're gonna tell themselves that I'm gonna be able to knock it all off the plate and start over from ground zero. The reality is that business is not a game of home runs. Business is a game of runs, and the person that has the most runs is gonna end up win the game in the long run. If you're down in the bottom of the 7th and you have a guy that gets up on the home plate and you're down 3-1, one home run is not going to win the game for you. You're going to have to get some more people on base before that happens. So my point in saying all of this is that you have to take this in bite-sized chunks. You have to understand what the market's capable of, what your product's capable of, whether that be the row crops that you're dealing with, corn, cotton, soybeans, whatever, or livestock that you're dealing with, and don't try to live in a state of wishfulness. If you live in a state of wishfulness, that will be the what takes you out of business in the long term. And that comes with a sound risk management plan that stretches over all elements of the operation. The first key to profitability in knowing your numbers is you have to understand your asset base and you have to understand the liabilities that are against them. You have to understand what not only the liability of the direct note that you're dealing with at the bank, but also the overhead that you're having to contribute in order to keep that asset producing. And is it actually producing above and beyond what you're putting into it? We stress a lot about equipment and cattle and understanding how those items on the middle part of your balance sheet are returning or not returning equity to you in the long run. Those are the elements that people really need to focus on. I'm investing in this. That's going to result in XYZ in my operation, which ultimately returns equity of this. This is all the part of the business planning process and setting a plan and measuring your successes or your failures through the year to that plan. What we have experienced in a producer today, I just discussed this with them, is we go from a point of high leverage, we go from a point of working capital. You insert a good, smart human being, a good, smart producer, which there's lots of them, and you give them a plan in a very short period of time, that balance sheet and that cash flow starts to evolve. It starts to evolve into something that's more acceptable, not only to the banks and the insurance companies. You start thinking beyond banks, insurance, risk management. And you start thinking, I've got control now and I can see my path forward for my operation and I can understand the impact of my actions. At that level, you are now controlling the dials of your operation. You're moving the business forward and you're not just a product of the environment anymore. I think a lot of producers dread digging into their numbers because they're afraid of what they're going to see. And I'm going to say, in my experience, that it's neither as good as you think it is or as bad as you think it is. It's usually somewhere in the middle. And if you don't understand what the numbers are telling you, that's even harder to really make it make sense for those producers. So I think here at Legacy Farmer, we offer that unique advantage for people that are members of our community in helping them understand what those numbers mean and understanding how to overcome their weaknesses by leveraging their strengths. So, another element that we like to talk about here at Legacy Farmer is team management. Team management is huge, something that sometimes feels superficial or something overwhelming for a lot of producers and operators. Partly because you don't really understand who's on your team. You're thinking, "Well, it's me that's doing all of it." No, you got a banker, you got an insurance agent, you got a risk management specialist, an agronomist, the list goes on and on. Even those are third parties, you've outsourced that part of your labor. Those are still people that have to be managed. You have to define your expectations of what it takes for a person that's operating in with your business to continue operating with your business. So when we talk about what are those expectations? There's a core set of principles that every human being abides by when they go through their daily life. That core sense of principles often leaks into the next elements of their business. We find that the most successful operators and operations are the ones that can identify employees and third parties that identify with those core principles because ultimately you're moving towards the same mission and vision, which aligns up with your goals for your operation. The other part of team management that we often like to talk about, we get a little bit scared about, is succession planning. Succession planning is huge because succession planning is an indication of who is coming into your team and ultimately takes over. There are processes that need to be taken into consideration as we continue to build out the succession plan. We need to identify what it's going to take to manage these families and what it's ultimately going to take to create an employee standard that makes you the industry leader in attracting top talent in your area. When you're working with your team, the way that we make sure that everybody's aligned is first and foremost, we got to stress our ability to grow as communicators. Communication comes in a number of different ways. Body signs comes through verbal communication, written communication, expectations, standards, all of this kind of thing. The last thing you want to do is leave anything open for interpretation in your company. And so you have to define what your expectations are. And this is where core values, mission, and vision come in. And then you also have to define key responsibilities for each role in your company. When we start digesting the team chart within Legacy Farmer, one of the first things that we really push people to do is go back to the basics. And people don't like doing this, but you need to write out a job description for each role within your company. That job description needs to be acknowledged by the team member in your company. I'd even write out a job description for your banker so he understands what your expectations are as your banker. This is a person that you're paying for services just like an employee. Your interest is the wages you are paying to the banker. So you have to understand these people really need to be looking to you for guidance and leader of this entire team. The only way that we're going to ever successfully do that is define our expectations super clearly and understand the type of people that we're dealing with. The questions often posed, how much do you think that I'm losing by not managing my team accordingly? Well, I think that really depends on the operation. And also, there's more than money at risk here, too. There's sanity, there's stress, all this other stuff. Because in economics, we talk about maximizing your overall welfare according to your profit, right? Profit's only one indicator of how well your life's going. There's also the team aspect at your home and dealing with your friends and your faith and all of these other things. When your team is not excelling and not pulling their weight within their responsibilities, the natural instinct within agriculture is to the main operator to jump in and do all these jobs for them. And I see it all the time. We have even very profitable operations that have found ways to fill in the gaps. I have an operator over on the West Coast that does a really good job of generating profit, but he's also had a heart attack in his early 40s because he carries so much stress into his operation. If he was managing his team accordingly, defining responsibilities, which he is doing successfully now and making progressive steps towards doing that. But if he's doing that, it pulls stress off, allows him to be the husband, the father, and of course, the follower of whatever faith they're a part of at the highest level. And I think so beyond profit, there's also the happiness factor that you have to pull into play. And also, you have to think too, if my team is dysfunctional and my long-term goal is to be the successor or create successors in my operation, ask yourself, are the pressures that you're dealing with, the inefficiencies in your team, something you're willing to allow to be passed on to your wife and kids in the event something happens? I don't think that answer's ever met with an overwhelming yes. And usually it's like, oh, I deal with it, so it's not a big problem. Guys, you have to understand that this operation and your actions affect everyone around you. Your bottom line's one thing. Now, the other part of it is if your team's doing their job and responsibilities are really well defined. Let's say a pivot breaks down in the field and you have a bunch of employees that are not in the system of understanding their responsibilities, driving past it all day. It heats up, gets dry, and that crop burns up. How much did we lose? These are things that we have to really digest whenever we're talking about a team chart. And team management is extremely difficult, but it is your responsibility as the owner and the CEO of your operation. If you fail to recognize that, that will be your demise in the long run. Either from a stress standpoint or a profitability standpoint, guys. So a lot of people come into our operation and they're really, really focused on profit. Profit is not your most important metric. And if that is all you're focused on, then your long term goals are going to be shot if succession or success is anything part of your long term goals. We fast forward 10 years from now, we're not going to give a crap what we made in 2025. If we're looking at kind of stepping off the ship, potentially handing this over to our children, what we are going to be looking at is that equity figure. So people need to shift their mindset from thinking about profit to thinking about how my equity is growing. People are like, well, profit, that's the figure where I take home money. Well, I get that. But if you're focusing on equity, you inherently have to focus on profit because equity is a function of profit. But there's more that goes into the equation. It's how you're managing your assets as well. There are lots of custom operators out there across the country that are highly, highly profitable, but don't have anything to show for it because all they have invested in is equipment and it depreciates faster than they can make money to keep up with it. Guys, if you're heavy on equipment, heavy on cattle, you have a light land base or you have a light cut cash base, you're fighting a losing battle. You have nothing to lean into. You have nothing to pass on. The shift in mindset needs to happen. It happens slowly. But equity is your most important figure if you're going to be successful in the long run. So, if this sounds like you in any way, shape, or form, please click the link below. Talk to one of our people. Let's start out by having an initial conversation about balance sheet and cash flow and really dive into the pressures of your operation. We have extremely highly qualified staff here that I think you'll find that can elevate just about any operation, no matter where you are. And we would love to work with you.